Welcome, everyone, and happy Thursday. It is noon Eastern time here in the booming metropolis just outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, a little place I like to call Ambler, PA. And Ambler, noon Eastern time Thursday, you know what that means. It is time for your favorite show on the internet, Talent Experience Live, the show that covers everything that you need to know in talent acquisition, talent management, recruiting, human resources as a whole, and of course, artificial intelligence. And Talent Experience Live is proudly brought to you by the good folks here at Phenom, whose purpose is to help 1 billion find the right job. Of course, that's billion with a B. It is the reason why we exist as an organization, why we host this program every Thursday, why we also have a fantastic podcast with Cliff Yerkowitz. We just had an episode air this past Monday with Kellen White. You definitely want to check that one out. Why we have been at every single HR Tech event under the sun. Why we are just getting back from our CAB event down in NASA. Why we were in Germany a few short weeks back for I Am Phenom Europe, with I Am Phenom India coming up in just a few short weeks as well. And of course, our flagship I Am Phenom coming up in Philadelphia in March. We do all of that to help work towards our purpose of helping 1 billion find the right work. And of course, the way that we do that is through our applied artificial intelligence experience platform, which helps candidates find the right fit faster, employees evolve in their current roles and beyond, recruiters achieve next level productivity and efficiency, and managers get to build better teams through data analytics and automation. I mentioned all of that is powered by super slick artificial intelligence and of course, machine learning. So if any of that interests you at all, immediately following this program, run on over to phenom.com. Feel free to check out everything that we have to offer, maybe request a demo, check out our partnership portal, and everything in between. Wow, that was a mouthful. Well, now that the bills have been paid, we have checked all the boxes that we need to keep this program running. We have a very special episode for you today. We are joined by NAS Recruitment, and specifically we talk about the importance of authentic employer brand. I was joined by Jennifer Henley, Steve McGowan, and Cliff Mills, all of NAS, and we sat down for a nice little conversation about some brands that are doing employer branding correctly, maybe some areas where people need to improve. But overall, the real theme was that just posting on job boards is not enough anymore. We have very savvy candidates, as we all know. I think Cliff dives into a very specific point with the introduction of artificial intelligence for candidates, the amount of research that they're able to do, the amount of information that gets served up to them before they click apply. So we talk all about that, about auditing, about creating a cohesive both consumer and employer brand and how that can impact your potential talent pool as well. Anyway, it is a fantastic episode. I want to thank all of them for sitting down with me for this episode. But without any further hesitation, here is NAS Recruitment on an authentic employer brand and how job boards are not enough. Welcome everyone to Talent Experience Live. I really appreciate you all taking the time today. Jennifer, want to start with you. I know you prepared some introductions for everyone and want to give them their moment in light. So we'll hand the floor over to you.
Sounds great. Thanks, Devin. I appreciate you having us this afternoon. We're thrilled to be part of the Phenom marketplace and really have the chance on how NAS and Phenom work together to elevate that talent experience for our shared clients. So I'm Jennifer. I'm Service COO of NAS Recruitment. I'm joined today by two of my incredible colleagues that I've worked with for a number of years. Steve, our creative director, leads the team who is the team behind building the brands, the storytelling, and the visual identification for all of our client partners. And then Cliff, our senior director of client services, who keeps the strategy grounded, ensures the solutions we deploy are truly supportive and strategic to achieve our clients' hiring goals.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for taking the time today. Super exciting topic that we have. I think over the course of years, I know NAS has been around for over 75 years, started in newspaper ads, and have transitioned into job ads and everything like that. It has been talked about, and I know you all have talked about it, how job ads alone won't cut it anymore. I want to ask you, what has changed in how candidates behave? Obviously, we're all using paper now, but what truly has changed when it comes to their actions?
I think a lot of candidates, look at jobs just like a consumer now. They do a lot more research. they poke around. I think in branding is so important, to really establish that authenticity of a company, and true genuine branding is real important. Aspirational branding, it has to be aspirational and motivating enough to attract a candidate, but it also has to be genuine to the company, because retention is always very important too. You want to be able to, really authenticize that does resonate to existing employees as well.
Absolutely. I think that candidates have begun to almost have, I want to call it a sixth sense or a radar, right? To see what is genuine anymore. And we're all becoming more in tune with this, I think, because we're tested every single day when we log online. And is this AI? Is this not AI? Organizations are saying that overall, this is kind of a media problem. But I think from your perspective, you believe it's actually more of a storytelling and experience problem. How can we achieve that and kind of put that media question to the side?
I think it's important to understand what motivates your talent. And I think it's going to look a little bit different for every single organization with whom we work with, and for every organization listening in today. Like it varies greatly. And I think getting at the heart of what motivates that talent, unique frustrations that they experience when searching for work, what ultimately led them to your organization, is going to help cater the type of messaging platform that you would put into market that's going to help attract that talent. And what's important is, to your point around technology and the filter that we all view the world through now with the rise of AI, is like, authenticity matters, right? And I think that we all kind of have our little BS radar in the back of our brain where we're reading through things where we're like, oh, we're just being told something right now. Like, this isn't actually true. And so the way in which you tell that story should be through your people. They're your best advocates by which to be able to tell that story. And how you differentiate yourself is having your people tell that story. And it seems simple, true, but it's the way in which we've seen success with our clients here at NAS, and it should be central to any given brand strategy that you put in the market.
Yeah, and you mentioned that we all kind of have those the little BS meters. I think there was a time, excuse me, as my voice cracks, during the pandemic, where we started to see that turn on its head a little bit, right? People were leading with purpose. They were talking about work-life balance, and not to say that that's gone away, but I think with the return to office, with a lot more onus and, quite frankly, less jobs on the market as we all experiment with AI and people try and figure this out, that really telling the truth, can I start here as an intern and spend the next 30 years of my life at this organization? So before we jump into kind of why job ads just aren't enough, what should we take away from this conversation, and what should they look for that maybe they can assist tomorrow with helping avoid that BS meter a little bit?
I think part of when we get the BS meter, it's I think managing that employer brand is so important, because you kind of said it. Company cultures are always shifting. We had a major shift during the pandemic, and then we're starting to shift again, and that's that authenticity that. You need to manage your employer brand, and your employer brand's going to change. I think a lot of candidates and there's so many negative reviews out there, and a lot of, Glassdoor and some of those other, social media sites that are reviewing, they're going to pick up a lot of the negativity. And then your employer brand has to kind of fight against that a little bit and be able to battle that. I think the important thing is to manage your employer brand, and it doesn't just end after you create an employer brand and leverage it into your career site and all your campaigns. It's always evolving, and you should always assess it and change it according to your company culture to keep it genuine.
Absolutely. I was just going to add. Oh, go ahead. We're all jumping in.
Yeah, I think because you got me thinking. I'm like, yes. An authentic, I think, employer brand too isn't just the tagline. Whether, despite what's happening in the market trends, brands are changing, I think, quicker now with more hard edges. But I think it's, it comes down to just that lived promise of that employee experience. So when your brand, your EVP align with reality, you're building that trust, you're attracting the right talent, and then you're creating that competitive advantage. So I think that's really what, comes together, and why it's so important for authenticity.
And to Steve's point, I think it's important to identify what those measurement points are, because your brand is an ever evolving, ever changing experience for candidates and how they interact with it. And it's important for us to keep our ear to the door, ear to the ground, however you want to phrase it, to be able to understand like what's changing about our culture. Like, do we have a pulse on what our folks are saying? Are you looking to our employee pulse surveys that we're sending out on a monthly, quarterly basis, whatever frequency you adopt internally? How are we taking the learnings from that and activating that externally to our external talent market to attract other individuals here? How are we responding to the changes that we're having as an organization internally and communicating that externally? If you've got a return to office policy, it's a harder sell than it once was. And so what's the rub? What's the advantage? How are you making access to information more available for talent? And how is that always evolving continually throughout the duration of your time as an organization, really?
Jennifer, it's funny you mentioned the hard edges. That I think has even transpired into branding, right? Where we've moved away from these serif fonts that are in everyone's logo, and we jump to this kind of bold, in-your-face look and feel, and it's changing back and forth, right, on a regular basis. When you think about today's talent market and why job ads are limited, is it because of how savvy candidates may be, where yes, they're going to look at kind of those burn book areas of Glassdoor or wherever it may be, where negative comments always filter the top, just like any social media. But I think candidates are also, they want to experience that same feeling wherever they investigate your brand, right? Whether it is social media, whether it is the career site, wherever it may be. Is that why we think that job ads alone won't work anymore, because you truly have to stand out and be everywhere all at once?
I think part of that lived brand experience is the perception and what you're seeing anywhere you look for them. You want a consistency. So when you do click on a job ad and go to that career site, you have that same experience, and that employer brand has to resonate through all different communications. So I think that's pretty important. So it does go beyond just a job ad. I think it's just like any other marketing brand. The more that you're comfortable with it and the more you see it, the more you're going to buy it or click apply or feel comfortable about that company.
Yeah, and I think also too, candidates, they don't have always the time or want to make the time or have always the interest. There's a lot of passive seekers. I think studies are 50 to 75% of people who may consider a new career but aren't actively seeking, right? So I think making the time and having the interest, and what NAS does, which is powerful, is helping those clients showing up consistently. When they do show up, it's consistent. It's consistent where across career sites, ads, social, video, all the internal channels, so that the technology really has the fuel to help it be more personal, automated, and really elevate the talent experience. But I think that we really have to meet the candidates where they are, which is making it bold and attractive to consider, and then making it consistent so that they convert.
Are there any examples of companies that you guys have worked with that are doing this successfully that you'd like to share about?
There's a company, Patient Point, and they're a digital health company that provides patient engagement solutions. And what we did was we created an employer brand for them, where we leverage in testimonials throughout their career site, throughout social media ads, throughout a video series. And what they did was they were able to implement this holistic experience into some social campaigns, some blog posts, which increased their brand-related social interactions by 327%. I mean, like really getting that lived brand experience out there. LinkedIn has reported that 75% of candidates consider an employer brand before even applying. So it's so important, to get that out there. So, that was definitely a success story for them.
I want to say, I think that it's around 7 to 8 touch points that a candidate needs to achieve before they apply, right? When we talk about this research, when we talk about some of the social campaigns that Patient First has said, and Jennifer, you mentioned that there's a lot more passive candidates. Do we think that it is because these brands aren't household names, right? It's not Nike, Adidas, whoever it may be, where it's, I immediately know this company, I want to work there. Do they have to familiarize themselves more? Why do we think that they're requiring so many touch points, so many emails, so many abilities to surface this employer brand before they actually make any decisions?
My read on the market is it doesn't matter the size of the organization. While some household brands may have some brand familiarity, I've worked with brands of all size, Fortune 10s, all the way to small mom and pop shops, right? And they all suffer from the same issue. And the issue is demand's at an all-time high, and there's oftentimes limited supply of talent, right? You've got a multitude of choices of other competitors hiring in your market, some closer to your house. And the important thing is like, there's a right fit for everybody. And this is why brand's so important, is in that crowded marketplace, you've got all these employers out there sharing a message of why you should work for them. The messages that are going to rise to the top goes back to what we were talking about, are messages of authenticity. Mm-hmm. You have to be able to cut through the noise. And that's the only way to really be able to do so. You also factor in, there are going to be cases where you're a smaller employer trying to hire in a rural market in the United States, right? You may not have the availability of talent in that specific market to be able to find the high skill types of roles that you're trying to hire for, in which case you have to consider relocation or alternative markets. And so that's going to be a harder sell. So the 7 to 8 touch points that you just discussed previously is the standard, those high skill, like low supply instances. The number of touch points it's going to take to be able to convince an individual to uproot their life and their family and potentially consider relocation to other markets going to increase. And so the amount of storytelling that you have to be able to put in the market to be able to show other people who've done it successfully and provide those proof points so individuals can feel that they have confirmed that this is the right move for me, and I need to be able to do that myself, and I can see myself in that individual's shoes, plays the utmost important when trying to develop a strategy from soup to nuts.
I was going to say there's so much competition with job ads, and it's a lot easier just to post a job than it is to invest in a brand and achieve all those touch points. So to level yourself above that competition is to leverage an employer minds of the candidates with these touch points.
I want to ask you a bit of an abstract question. When we talk about these touch points, is it limited to just them interacting with the career site, with talent acquisition folks, with the job postings, or does it also include the consumer side, right? I think selfishly, from my perspective, Gillette, huge sponsor of the New England Patriots. I'm a New York Jets fan, so I don't buy Gillette products. That's just me. I'm sure they have wonderful things, but I bring that bias, and I admit it. When we think about candidates, can they separate the two from a consumer perspective as well as from a candidate perspective? And is that included where someone may have a poor customer experience, when they're calling a helpline or whatever that may be? Do we think about that when we're talking about some of these touch points and having a relevant brand to attract top talent?
Absolutely. I mean, I think an employer brand and a marketing brand are intertwined, and your perception on a product is going to reflect on whether you want to work for that company. And sometimes, if there is a negative perception on a marketing brand, that employer brand's got to fight twice as hard to attract someone to work for them. So that's all part of that discovery process to really dig into that, company culture and come up with messaging that will counteract maybe some of that negativity of a marketing brand. So I think it is so intertwined, and it does I think people do make up their minds, from a marketing brand as opposed to an employer brand, because they're so intertwined. And I think an effective employer brand should still build off of a marketing brand. They should work with each other.
I mean, it's one of the things that I know jumps out about your particular model at NAS, right? You have consumer perception, employee reality, employer brand. When you're thinking of that whole holistic view, where do you see most organizations fall short when it comes to the alignment between those key pillars?
I think they probably often get lost in just the talent attraction. I think it's really easy for talent acquisition professionals to get lost in trying to hit a goal, to have people in seats and to be able to hit certain hiring numbers. And I think by doing that, we get tunnel vision to be a little bit too tactical on how are we filling the pipelines to be able to have sufficient talent. And it's really easy to not think about what's the bigger story that we're trying to tell here? There's a reason why we're having difficulty filling these positions, and to be able to look up and above and outside of the noise is really what is important to what Steve was talking about, is like, how are we getting to the root cause of what is driving the ability for us to have such poor talent pipeline? And how are we addressing that in the marketplace? Having uncomfortable conversations when uncomfortable conversations need to be had, but doing so in a way that's going to be in the best promotion of our organization and help us continue to meet the demand that our leaders are breathing down our neck, asking us to meet.
Yeah. I think for a long time, from a talent acquisition perspective, it was simply viewed as a funnel. Numbers in, kind of, you get more applicants, you're going to get more hires, right? And I think as we've shifted to a skillful workforce, I think in every position, it's not just about getting as many applicants as you can that perhaps only a job board would give you, right? You have to find the right talent there, and that's going to come from all of the things that you talk about from top to bottom. There's entire industries that are based upon this solution. I look at the staffing industry, right? The reason why they exist is because there are gaps in organizations' talent flows, that they need people in the door tomorrow, and it's not a quick fix. Are there any brands that you all have worked with that are getting the alignment done right when you think about that top to bottom? Is Patient Point one of them? I think Toyota was another one that may have been mentioned.
Yeah, Toyota's a good example of one. They entered into a new market with the production, or the creation of their new battery plant in North Carolina. And really our focus was there, given the location, the rural nature of the location in which they were developing their battery plant in, was like grounding their messaging in community first, craftsmanship, growth. It helps that they are a name brand organization, a household name, but we wanted to make sure that when we did so, that we brought into this new market, that we were being sensitive to the market in which we're going into, but being intentional, right? We didn't want to be able to tell a story that we couldn't stand behind or support, right? And so again, same principles underpinned the work that we did there, making sure that we're understood what attracted the people within that region, why they sought out a career with Toyota, and then turn that messaging into a story that would be convincing to be able to find the talent required to be able to help them fill a role in a new market that they hadn't otherwise had a presence in.
And another example is where you kind of have to be a little bit more flexible with. We did an employer brand for Deerbergs, which is a major grocery store chain in the Midwest. And we had to develop messaging to hire hourly, but then also hire management. And hourly is a little bit more of a numbers game, because you want to get as many applicants as you can to a degree. You still want to get quality applicants, so that is definitely a focus. But then management, you really want to focus a little bit more. The talent acquisition teams are so bogged down with applications, especially now with the job market being a little down, and a lot of people are applying. So it's so hard for them to go through everything, and that's why you have to get quality applicants. But to come up with messaging that can speak to hourly as opposed to management, or for some of our hospital clients, when you need EVS as opposed to physicians, or something a little bit more high quality, if you will. Nursing is a big thing. You want to make sure that you're getting quality applicants in, and we're able to do that through targeted messaging, targeted campaigns.
The organizations that you're talking about, whether it's De Beers, Toyota, Point Patient, I think one of the factors that we haven't really talked about specifically was their culture, right? I think you can put a brand new paint job on a 1991 Chrysler LeBaron, but if it has motor problems on the inside, that's something that people are eventually going to find out. How do companies kind of figure this out firsthand, right? Being sure that they are authentic, that they are reaching, the right audience and not being insensitive, whether it is a new market, like in Toyota's case. How do companies kind of investigate that before they learn, from their mistakes?
And we usually help them out a lot with that. When we do an employer brand, we start off with discovery right away. And we have a unique discovery process to gain that authenticity, through a comprehensive discovery process. And this includes, focus groups, surveys, candidate personas, competitor analysis. We want to find out what their true culture, their values are, but we also want to find differentiators, against, their competition.
Jennifer, I know you mentioned before, it's more than just a tagline. Without naming names, have you ever, seen, or any of you run into any organizations where they think that employer brand is simply a tagline and you actually have your authentic self in order to find success?
I think when Steve and the team, and they do such a great job, because, there's a lot of things we run into. It's either a tagline or a logo can't solve a change, but neither can aspirational goals. Everything's a journey, right? So I think there's an opportunity to, where are you today, and a realization of that, and where do you want to be, and how do we help you get there? Because you may want to be something that you're not today, but how do we encourage the existing culture and the new talent that we attract and engage to be a part of that workforce, really make that impact to become that type of organization you're striving to be. So I think that's a culture that everyone needs to accept. Typically, when we are undergoing a brand development for a client, and we want to ensure, again, that the candidates will see the message is consistent and aligns with marketing's goals, but also ultimately that it's truth well told. You want to be sure that you're not saying it's something and getting something far different, because then it just creates more issues, from retention to culture to all sorts of things that are just negative that you can control. So I think just having a realization of who you are and what you want to become, and then having those conversations from the jump, because it is much more than a tagline. It's much more than what you want to be. There's a lot of realization that you have to just come clean with, and then be prepared to adjust. But it's never done in a vacuum, and it's never done overnight. I think it's something that has to be fostered and worked with throughout the time that you're working with new talent and existing talent too.
Yeah, I think it falls back to what I said earlier too, where marketing and employer brand need to align, but there are differences. A marketing brand is speaking to a consumer, and employer brand is speaking to a potential employee. So the messaging, that's all going to be a little different. And we've had in the past where a marketing brand tagline, if you will, was forced to be used for an employer brand, and you just have to find ways to find that medium ground where you can still speak to a candidate, and you're not just regurgitating that same marketing messaging to a candidate, because you're talking about different things. You're talking about the culture there, what it's like to work there, the benefits there, not how good their product is. So. Right. As far as, like Coca-Cola, it tastes great, but is it a great place to work? So you gotta adjust your messaging.
Yeah, I imagine every step through Nike's application process, it just says, just do it, right? Upload your resume, just do it. That's not going to give you the right field. I'm sure they've worked hard not to do that. Jennifer, one thing you mentioned was being aspirational, right? Mm-hmm. I think that there is certainly a fine balance with that. I know Phenom's purpose is to help 1 billion. There's a reason I wasn't involved in this meeting, but I'm sure there was a reason it wasn't help 8 billion people, right? They found that kind of sweet spot of, hey, this is a great stretch goal for us. This is what we are striving for, but it doesn't cross the barrier of that's impossible. What's the risk of either being too aspirational or maybe not aspirational enough when you're thinking of these, kind of goals and trying to be genuine and authentic?
The risk of being too aspirational is clearly there's just too much ground to make up and to try to be something that you can't do in a short amount of time. A lot of times when these types of projects or initiatives are underway, it's because it's been thought about and discussed for a long time. And typically there's a lack of patience. So if this is what we need to do, let's get it done. And knowing that if it's too aspirational, and you have to have that patience to ensure that you're going to get there. But I think that you can solve for that in, creating those critical milestones. Like, we're going to identify what the brand looks like from an employer value proposition. How do we integrate that internally? Do we start with certain job categories, or like for a healthcare system, let's start with nursing. So ensure that so I think there's ways in which you can do it. If it's not risky enough, you're going to be back at square one in 2 more years when everybody else is fed up with what didn't hit the mark. So I think there is striking a balance, which is critical. But as long as you have realistic goals and you have open communication and you're aligning with what I believe kind of moves the needle for your organization more. So if it is the nursing workforce, which is likely 25 to 30% of the workforce in a healthcare system, maybe you create an intermediate brand, like an interim brand, and you develop kind of the messaging and allow for some feedback and focus surveys to really validate where you're going. And then I think the rest can become seamless. But I think just striking that balance and not rushing it, but being bold enough to make the changes that you need to make.
Striking that balance is essential in that there's ways in which you can validate that, right? And what that balance needs to be. And one, it's understanding what, as an organization, what your own roadmap looks like and where you're headed. But also, how does that translate to how we communicate the types of projects and stuff that you'll be a part of by being part of our organization? But then rooting that in reality. It's also essential to understand what motivates talent more broadly, not just talent to your organization, but when you look at a subset of talent, say, for instance, registered nurses, right? We have access to data. You can go, like, if you have LinkedIn Talent Insights, plug LinkedIn, go into LinkedIn. You can pull from their employer brand surveys by setting up your audiences in specific markets. You can understand from those individuals what motivates them broadly. And then it's an opportunity for us to be able to look from the external marketplace to our internal. Can we offer that? If so, what is that? How do we help? But then if we can't, then alternatively, what's our messaging? You know what I mean? Like, if we're not able to hit that, then how do we spin this in a way where it's still compelling to be able to convince talent who may be seeking something that we don't offer? How do we be able to position that in a way and still be realistic so that there's something that they can find here that they may not be we might be on the cutting edge of technology in this one regard, if that happens to be a motivator that they're aligned to? How do we spin the access of the tools and resources that we do have at our disposal that may be in a way that might convince an individual to want to come work here?
Yeah, and I think going back to that, if it's too aspirational, I think you risk an employee coming in and getting a little dissatisfied, like, I was promised this, and then we all know the dollars it takes retention, if you have to rehire someone. And so you do risk, if it gets too aspirational, with a retention problem. That first 90 days at employees at a company is so important. And if you sold them this and it's something else, you risk losing them.
We're experiencing that right now with a healthcare client of ours, where before they even discuss the ability to activate their brand externally in the marketplace, they focused on internal first, for the same point that Steve just alluded to, is they don't want to sell a vision or an aspiration of what are this organization's like if they can't actually live those values internally. And so we went through the exercise with them, looking at their employee pulse surveys, looking at all the different touch points that an individual would have during their tenure at an organization, the interactions that they have with leadership. And we figured, like, if we want to change the culture and the perception of what it is like, let's work here. One, what does best look like? How do we aspire to be there? And then how do we arm our leadership with the talking points that are required for them to be able to infuse that discussion with candidates and to uphold the culture that we're trying to represent, so that when we've established it internally first, to activate that externally as candidates come on board in their first 90 days, it shouldn't feel foreign to them. That same brand that we've tried so hard internally should feel like a natural progression for individuals, rather than being aspirational externally to the external market. They focused on their internal efforts first to make sure that we're rooting it in reality, that when candidates come on board, we want to make sure that we're being aspirational, yet you can live and feel it once you're already here. And I think that is something that we have to account for, is we can only be so aspirational until you get someone in the door. They have to be able to live and feel it and see it to make sure that they stick around, or else it's a cyclical nature. We're just chasing our tail, trying to solve for the same problem over and over again.
Yeah, and that employer brand consistency, it goes throughout an employee's life cycle. It's not just, attracting them, it's keeping them, so I think that's so important that an employer brand needs to resonate in hiring.
I think it's just that consistency. We were at a client meeting once, and I was with Cliff recently in the past year, and they were talking about why brand is so critical and why they need it. So typically the people in the room talking about why they need it and really championing that idea, they're sold, right? But there's a opportunity for reality here, right? So because of those hard edges, because getting that attention, being consistent, it's a lot of layers. Like 10 years ago, 20 years ago, when I even started, it was, again, ads and looks and feels and go. But now it's a lot of validation. It's reaching me in the right spot at the right time, 7th time, 12th time. But they were telling us in that meeting, that particular meeting, and Cliff, you may recall, they said, we had ordered Chick-fil-A for lunch because I spaced on ordering lunch for the team. And somebody said, it took over 7 years for them to create the hospitality statement of my pleasure, right? Instead of thank you, let's be different. Let's be authentic. Let's have a differentiator in who we are as we serve our customers. And it's my pleasure. It took over 5 years. It started at a leadership meetings, and now it's widely recognized as everyone says my pleasure. You immediately think of Chick-fil-A. And I think the thing about that is it took time. Like now it's ingrained in their culture, right? It's actually their culture more than as a tagline. So they really took it a step further. But I think that was because of consistency. It started from the top. It was done, I think, because I looked it up. I was like, seriously, that's interesting. And as I looked it up, just to kind of Google fact check, it was like, wow, it really did take years. I mean, they've been around for a long time. They're a great organization. You hear a lot about their culture. They use their own employees in commercial or their own customers in commercials. It took years. And I think that response to adopting is that belief. And then they begin to live that belief. And then when they live that belief, they become that brand. And so that's an interesting thing to me that I pulled was just, it didn't happen overnight. It was started by one person. It was consistently led by leaders, and a tagline became their culture, and it is a differentiator. So it was really that perfect storm for them, that they were patient and they were consistent.
You have to walk the walk, right? At the end of the day. And
Yes.
You mentioned, the employer branding, starting with employees. If you say you have a great tenure, at the organization, and people are going to start at an entry level position and end up, in a management role, the candidates are going to want to see that firsthand.
Possible.
They're going to want to have those discussions. And if you're billing it before it has happened, that's something that your candidates are going to pick up on. I think they're very savvy when it comes to reaching out to people on the team to try and stand out a little bit more or whatever it may be. And they're going to look up folks' LinkedIn and say, oh, the entire marketing team has only been here for 2 years. How are they, growing people, to give them their gold watches when they retire? I think, but obviously you mentioned 5 years for my pleasure. These things don't happen overnight, right? And I think we started off this discussion, talking about how job ads, it may not be the starting point anymore. What should teams prioritize to have an effective employer brand that isn't too aspirational or selling too much? Is it behind the scenes videos? Is it showcasing, thought leadership conversations from existing employees? What does that look like so that we can give the audience at home maybe some things to think about in their next meeting and prioritize? Obviously, we want them to talk to NAS, of course, but what can they bring to the table before they have a discussion with you all?
I think some of the things that you hit on were correct, right? And using your people to be able to tell those stories, behind the scenes videos, like employee thought leadership, interactive career pages, like all those things are essential. But one thing I want to call out that we discussed a little bit about at the beginning of the call was on the topic of AI. All these things that we've said today are correct, but the new wrench that gets thrown into this puzzle is the rise of AI and the way in which candidates conduct research and learn about your organization. And that has changed drastically. We're starting to see organic traffic across the host of our clients' career sites decrease ever so slightly. And there's a major reason for that. And if you remember back in June, Google rolled out their new search experience more broadly across all consumers who weren't in beta testing. And rather than providing you links to websites that may contain the answer you're looking for, which are based on SEO principles, Google now answers the question for you. So as you might expect, candidates are less likely to click and visit your career site because Google's answering questions for you. So all these principles that we've discussed today change ever so slightly in that you can still control the content that Google uses to serve candidates and answer to those questions by the content in the story that you're telling on your career site. This is why career sites become so crucial, because in the absence of owning that content and having those behind the scenes videos, putting a spotlight on employee thought leadership, developing a page that helps activate that story, you're leaving it in the hands of Google's SEO algorithm, right? It's going to pull reviews. If you ask what it's like to work as an ICU nurse at X and X company, it's going to look across a plethora of sources and determine what it seems is the best fit. That might be a subreddit article. That might be a poor review on a Glassdoor ranking. And underpinning all of this is the same principles that has always governed Google's search algorithm, and that's search engine optimization, right? So I think the biggest thing for me to take away from some of this is conduct an audit, be a candidate, put your candidate hat on. What would I want to know? Go to Google, ask those questions. You'd be surprised at probably where you're showing up, but then equally where you're not showing up as a given source. We used to fight to compete for clicks in the former version of Google. Now we're fighting to compete for citations, right? Like we want Google to look at us as the authority figure on the topic. And so how do we take everything we've discussed down, distill it down into sound bites? Because in the absence of it, I'll use an example. On site, in preparation for the meeting, conducted a couple of searches, asked what it was like to work as a registered nurse in the IC unit at such and such company. One of the search results that came up was tied to a local news affiliate who did a spotlight on some Snapchat comments that were leaked from an employee talking about how bad it was working at the company. And so now they have to overcome that objection. Like, this is how candidates are finding us. When they want to figure out what it's like to work as an ICU nurse here, here's a hill that we have to figure out to solve for, right? That we haven't otherwise. And so this puts your citation, your career site at the center of this, and making sure that the data is structured properly so that Google can identify that this is an answer to a candidate question. You have the SEO authority developed through your career site that Google should be able to serve up. All of this kind of gets thrown out the window now if we don't solve for the ever-changing technology landscape that AI is kind of forcing us into.
The way that candidates are researching and searching for jobs, they are using AI. They are using, Microsoft Copilot, ChatGPT. I mean, if you've watched, like this weekend watching football, I think I saw, Microsoft Copilot ad like every other commercial with people people are using that when they used to use just Google, like searching for things. So I think AEO, answer engine optimization is so important, and I work with my writers, to come up with that content, because the career site is, it's informational for that candidate, but it's also, like Cliff said, it's so important because it's serving up answers that are going to be used when someone goes to AI to search information on that company. So it's so important to write it in a structure. We always thought SEO is so important. We got to write keywords, this and that, but we also now have to write in a structure that's going to easily serve up the information needed when someone is searching for a job via AI now. I mean, it's a whole new landscape. Things are changing so quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I think back to auditing the process. It was only a few short years ago where we at Phenom would say, when was the last time you applied for a job at your company?
Right.
Why don't you go through the process? Mm-hmm. Now we're taking it a step further and auditing, not just a Google search, but AI. So I want to ask you, is that the first step? Is it going to Copilot, ChatGPT, Perplexity, Claude, all of these different, and comparing and contrasting and seeing what the internet is digging up on your organization and what it's like to work there? Should that be where everyone starts today, I guess is the question.
Yeah. And do it across all the different, at least start with like the hard to fill positions, the ones that are keeping you up at night. try to view the job search experience through the lens of those individuals and conduct a search. Again, going back to the hallmarks that we talked about, like understanding what the motivators are that drive them, that's going to drive their search habits, right? So understanding what motivates talent is going to be how you would conduct those searches. So what types of, like, going back to the healthcare experience as an example, like what types of robotics are used in the operating room, right? At such and such organization. That's something that a registered nurse is going to care about because they might have a qualification or experience having worked with said robotics, and they're going to want to know that. But if we don't have content authored out on the internet that we've published on our own, be able to speak to that motivator, it's going to be, you're leaving the risk in the hands of someone else where they're like, yeah, they have it, but it's only being implemented on X and X number of surgeries that and you don't have the professionals. So really set back, start with Google, conduct searches from the lens of all the hard to fill roles in which that you're trying to fill for. Understand what motivates talent. Conduct your searches through those lenses, and you'll see pretty quickly that you'll discover that you're not showing up at all those sources. Take catalog or inventory of the ones in which you're not showing up, and work with your career site provider, your ATS organization if they're offering your career site, or your own in-house IT team, and figure out like how are we structuring this schema from an FAQ standpoint aligned to our audiences to be able to answer those questions technically. You know what I mean? Just not how are we making sure that the content's on our career site, but how is it properly coded and developed in a way in which it's discoverable by Google so that we now have a seat at the table when candidates are conducting searches in a specific way.
Absolutely. I mean, so you can have a video on your career site, but if it links out to YouTube, it may not do you any good, right? Like these are things that you're about. So I want to thank you all so much for the time. I've learned more than I can ever possibly imagine today from all of you. Is there anything that I may have missed? Any questions that you wish I would have asked? Any final thoughts before we sign off?
I just want to add that, we are grateful for the opportunity also to talk about the work that we do and how it complements such a powerful platform. So we just want to thank you for the opportunity to represent as a marketplace partner. This is a nice, what we do fits hand in glove with the technology that you deliver, and it really helps us build brand clarity, messaging, content that all really makes these experiences meaningful, which I think is critical in today's job market. So thank you for that.
Thank you all so much.
I think it's all about, building relationships. Job ads aren't going to build those relationships. I think employer branding does. And, that's so important, to rise above it all.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you once again to Jennifer, Steve, and Cliff. I mentioned it was a pleasure talking to you. They are a newer partner in our partnership portal, our partnership agreement. So happy to have them. They have been a pillar within the recruitment industry for quite some time now. So always nice to work with them to help employers and employees find the right role, as well as build out that employer brand that we talked about. So can't wait to have them back on again in the near future. I'm sure we will see them at I Am Phenom coming up in March. But if you're interested in learning more about NAS, you can always check out their website or follow Jennifer, Steve, or Cliff on LinkedIn. I know they'd be happy to hear from you. But in the meantime, I hope everyone has a safe, happy, and healthy weekend. Can't wait to see you next week because we do this every damn Thursday. And it is always a pleasure to have the opportunity to sit down and talk with you all on a Thursday. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next week.